Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon at the Research Exchange Talk. It's really a pleasure to have you here. I'm Camille Crittenden. I'm Deputy Director of Citrus and also direct the Data and Democracy Initiative here at Citrus. We're really pleased to have all of you here in person, and I also want to welcome our web viewers at the other Citrus campuses at UC Davis, Merced, and Santa Cruz, as well as anyone who might be watching from the comfort of their office or their home online. We're really delighted to have Emily Jacobi here to talk about her work. And before I get to the introduction of Emily, just a couple of quick announcements. In this Research Exchange series, it goes on every Wednesday afternoon at noon here at Citrus. We have started one special thematic series in resilience. Together with a couple of other campus units that also have interest in this topic, the Institute for Transportation Studies and Trust, which is another unit having to do with cybersecurity. So the three organizations are co-sharing this interest in resilience and have various public lectures on this topic. And this one will begin in March at those three units. The other item I wanted to just highlight is with the Foundry, the Citrus's startup incubator, the next deadline for application for teams to apply is February 22nd. So be sure to take a look at the Foundry website for more about that program and talk to your students and colleagues if they have a great idea for a new startup. We're here to support them with space and advice and a little bit of funding, and mostly just a terrific community of innovators and entrepreneurial students and faculty and staff. Emily Jacobi is co-founder and executive director of Digital Democracy, a firm that focuses on empowering marginalized communities by creating agile programs with human-centric design and on-the-ground analysis and evaluation. Jacobi oversees the Digital Democracy staff, leads strategic planning and development, and works directly with grassroots partners on program design for human rights and community engagement. And we're really pleased that Emily is also on the advisory board of the Data and Democracy Initiative and lives here locally in the Bay Area after being away and all around the world for quite some time. Since 2007, her work has focused on researching and supporting the capacity of local organizations in closed and transitioning societies. And I'm really pleased to say that I first got to know Emily actually back in 2009 when I was at the Human Rights Center, and at that time we ran a mobile challenge before there were very many of such things. And Emily and Digital Democracy was one of the three finalists and winners in that program back a number of years ago. So it's really great to see the success of her organization since then. She previously worked for Internews Network and AllAfrica.com and as Assistant Bureau Director for Y Press. Jacobi began her career as a youth journalist, working to highlight young people's voices in professional media, and as you'll see in her presentation today, she continues to work on behalf of communities all over to help to expand their participation and engagement and have their voices heard in policymaking and other global decisions. Please join me in welcoming Emily Jacobi.
Thank you. Well, hello. It's great to be here, especially because I just came from not too far south in Oakland, where I live now, after living in New York for a long time at the beginning of Digital Democracy. So the talk today is really broadly about our work, which is on how we're leveraging technology by working directly with grassroots organizations to empower traditionally marginalized groups to have more of a voice in the issues that are impacting their lives, and specifically to work on defending their rights, both in human rights and environmental spheres. And before I get into that, I would love to know more about who's in the room here today, because I don't really know and would love to just know more about who you all are. So I'm not even quite sure what questions to ask to find out. So maybe most of you are professors, faculty members, and or students? Let's see. How many of you are professors? Okay. Other faculty members of some variety? Okay. Students? Great. Graduate level, I'm guessing? Yeah. Awesome. What departments? Maybe you could just toss them out, and I'll repeat them so that the folks listening online can hear it.
Master Development Practice.
Master Development Practice, awesome.
Energy and Resources Group.
Energy and Resources.
Public Health Policy.
Public Health Policy. What else? Who else am I talking to in this room?
Business and Entrepreneurship.
Business and Entrepreneurship, great.
Mechanical Engineering.
Mechanical Engineering. Okay, a little something of everything. I'll try to make the talk as relevant as I can. What I'm going to do is going to give a broad overview, a little bit of some of our past programs and a lot on what we're doing right now. And I'm excited for question and answers, so I'll get it rolling. And I love interaction, so feel free to raise your hand if you've got something pertinent to what I'm saying right at a moment. Feel free to call it questions as we go along. So our mission, I want to start with that, is to empower marginalized communities to use technology to defend their rights. And this really evolved out of work I was doing in Southeast Asia, 2007, 2008, finding that technology all over the world obviously is a force for good, bad, and otherwise. It's changing society in myriad ways. That's what Citrus is all about. This is not news to you. But how technology is changing society and what we're doing to decide the ways in which it's changing society, I think are really important questions. And two of our kind of core guiding principles, hypotheses that I will put out, or guiding principles I'll put out and try to back up through showing examples of our work, is that who is designing technology matters a great deal and has a really large impact on the outcomes of how technology is used. And secondly, that we all stand to benefit from democratizing not only access to technology, but in particular the ways in which technology is built and designed. So moving forward, our approach broadly is two things. One is that we work directly with marginalized communities, helping them incorporate technology into their work, doing trainings and capacity building, really helping them strategize about what are effective and appropriate ways to incorporate technology. And then second, we've started doing work actually building out open source tools, contributing to existing tool kits, and trying to make tools that more directly meet the needs of our partners, who again are traditionally marginalized groups that have not very much been in the centers of Silicon Valley where tools are made. This is, how many of you are familiar with Raspberry Pi? Cool, about almost half the audience. It's a cheap $35 basic computer that can be, was created originally for teaching purposes to help teach kids how to code, but can be used and adapted to all sorts of different uses. So over the past 6 years, we've done work in couple dozen countries all over the world, doing workshops, training, capacity building. And in that time, we found that we're most effective when we work with groups over a longer term, really building trust and relationships and helping them identify, again, appropriate ways to leverage technology to make their work more effective. So I'll give an overview of our process. We always start with digital literacy, which is understanding what the tools are and how to use them. We think it's really the basis for being able to do more effective work, which then leads to being able to leverage those tools for digital organizing. So really using the tools to advocate for specific challenges, problems that they're facing. And then once the tools that they're using have been incorporated into their work, then always the aim is to not just be using them to organize, to try to protest, to try to change things, but actually ultimately being more integrated into halls of power, maybe sharing information with government, whether it's at a local, national, regional level, or just having their information informing policy. So what we found that this looks like along the way, and I'll illustrate with a case study in a moment, is that when people learn how to use basic digital tools, especially when they've been isolated and haven't had a chance to interact with kind of more mainstream society, that it often, the first impact of that is actually just having confidence in telling their own story, recognizing what their experience has been, valuing that, and then going to share that with others. digital organizing, we often see during this phase a real growth in their leadership capabilities, their own sense of self and purpose, and their ability to organize their community around certain issues. And then finally, around the digital citizenship, they often become really strong advocates for the issues they're working on. So in 2010, as you all know, there was a devastating earthquake in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and many things were disrupted by that natural disaster. And one of the impacts was that millions of people were living in tent camps and displaced person camps around Port-au-Prince. This was April 2010, so about 4 months after the earthquake. A gathering of 100 women who are part of a grassroots women's organization called COFAVIV, which stands for Commission of Women Victims for Victims. They're a group that we started working with at that time. We had been asked down to Haiti to do work with the UN around addressing gender-based violence and looking at the role that mobile phones and other tools could play in helping to gather information about that, the violence that was happening, and help address it. It was actually a follow-up from the mobile phone program that we'd started that we actually got an award from UC Berkeley Human Rights Center for. So while we were down in Port-au-Prince, we saw a really huge disconnect between the UN agencies and international organizations that were trying to address these problems and the reality of people living at the front lines, living in the tent camps. These women had gathered in kind of an emergency meeting because they were facing, as I said, increased rates of violence in the camps, and they were trying to organize to do something about it. They were an entirely offline group at the time. Their clinic had been destroyed in the earthquake. They'd lost all of their records, but they were still organizing in person. So we started off with them doing photography workshops. Photography is a really great tool for transcending language and literacy barriers. A lot of the women in this group hadn't been formally educated, couldn't write very well, most only spoke Creole, but they could take pictures and they could communicate their experience through pictures. This is an image that one of the founders of the organization took of the other co-founder to illustrate how she had had to go into hiding after doing advocacy work to try to prevent violence in the camps. Later that year, we were doing some help with them documenting violence around the elections that were scheduled in November 2010, and then the post-election violence. This is a blog post that was written in Creole at the top and then translated into English for an international audience. And more images from the photography workshops. And what we found that initial period of digital literacy, working on photography, video, and blogging, helped them have more confidence in telling their story, helped them realize that there actually were people internationally who wanted to hear about it, helped them gain more prominence. And then they came to us and asked for further help to build out their capacity more. So we helped them digitize all of their records. They were just taking handwritten notes every time that a woman experienced a rape or sexual assault. They were doing a complex intake form, but it was all handwritten. And so because of that, when they were producing monthly reports and giving them to the government wasn't listening to them. They were even being accused of making up the numbers on the amount of violence that was happening. They were really struggling. So when we helped them create a digital database, it really changed the game for them because they were able to start producing detailed monthly reports that not only had the numbers tallied, but they were able to produce a map with where the incidents were being reported from, which camps they were coming from, the age range of the victims, etc. And through that period, the government started to work with them. International NGOs started to support them. And ultimately, they're now actually working with the Haitian police force, with the task force addressing violence against women. From that, they thought that there was even more they could do, and they really thought that what was missing in terms of the services for women dealing with violence was a lack of a place that women could go to get resources. So we helped them set up a free call center, still running today, 572. That is a free number that anybody in the country can call to get support around women's health issues. So they're not only addressing gender-based violence, but they're also helping women who are pregnant find the nearest clinic, helping people address where they can go for psychosocial support if they're dealing with post-violence trauma. And they've even fielded a lot of calls from young men calling to ask about healthy relationships. And the same woman, Malia, who was hidden behind the door in a few images before, in 2012 she was nominated to be a CNN Hero of the Year, which I think just really goes to show how much their efforts over time, by amplifying them through the technology that COFAV was leveraging, really got them to a different place in both a national and even international scale. One of the things that matters the most to us as an organization is not the work that we do in the present day with our partners, but what happens after we're gone, and building in sustainability over the long term. We're a small nonprofit. Our goal is never to become huge and have programs going for multiple years all over the world. Instead, we try to go in where we can make kind of the most difference and inject just the right amount of capacity building and tools to help our partners then take it from there. So the last thing we did in Haiti was beginning of 2013, so just about 2 years ago, we held a hackathon. It was the first hackathon held inside the country rather than outside the country, kind of on behalf of Haiti. And as you can see, most of the participants were local Haitians, and mostly at the technical university, but we did bring down some folks from North America, from Canada and the US, to come and help build out a website for COFAV to help them better track national services so that they could better service their callers calling from all over the country. And that was the last thing we did in Haiti, is we then fully transitioned the program to our local partners, to COFAV, who, as I said, are still running the call center today and are servicing thousands of women across the country. So in 2012, as we were planning to phase out of Haiti and really looking at what we had done most successfully, where we wanted to grow as an organization, we were asking the question of what's next and how do we continue to do the most effective work possible, and how do we scale our efforts, which, as I'm sure you all know, is always a big question, especially in nonprofit work. How do you take something that's effective and take it out? And because our work is really high touch, it's about direct contact with local groups, it's about really building trust and partnership, we felt that that aspect of it always has to be kind of close on the ground, working directly with real people. And on the other hand, technology does represent a great opportunity to be able to scale impact. And so we decided that based on our work and what we'd seen on the ground in Haiti and other places, that there was an opportunity, well, really, there's a missing gap in terms of technology that's being built that is often not addressing marginalized communities, particularly in rural areas. At that time, we'd done some work in a few different places, including rural Mexico and sub-Saharan Africa, and seen consistently that a lot of tech tools are not built with the idea in mind that electricity will be infrequent at best, that mobile phone access will be infrequent and spotty, the internet access will be very, very slow. And so we started doing work in the Amazon. Over the past few years, we got a grant from the Night News Challenge, the Knight Foundation, which supports journalism innovation, to build out a mobile toolkit to support populations living in remote, off-grid environments, to help manage, to help gather and share information about human rights and environmental challenges. So this is really when we started doing the second aspect of our work, which is doing more intentional tool building. So this is a pipeline, an oil pipeline in northern Peru near the Ecuador border. The oil drilling has been going on for about 4 decades there, and over the course of that time, there's been a huge amount of oil spills and contamination, and very little response and oversight from the Peruvian government. Similar sort of situation going on in Ecuador. You can see oil spills in the Amazon. They're nasty, have a big impact. And over the past 7 years, the local groups, the indigenous federations that live in these areas, I'm going to zoom in. This is the Loreto region. This is one of our partners, Feconaco, that works along one of the river basins. On each one of these river basins, there's oil drilling, and the local communities have been severely affected by it. Birth defects, challenges getting clean water, impacting the food supply, both obviously fish, but also even land mammals who are getting oil into their system from the drinking water. So about 7 years ago, my colleague Gregor, who is Digital Democracy's program director, he had started doing work. He'd been doing work in the Amazon for a while and began working with the local groups to set up environmental monitoring programs. So this is essentially where the indigenous federations were choosing individuals from their communities, nominating each one, like one per village, to be a local environmental monitor, and then Gregor and a few other folks were training them on how to use GPS. Let's see, skip ahead. This is my colleague Gregor in the lower left, training them on how to use GPS, how to go out into the field and take GPS points or geographic information, take photos, and document what was happening in the field. So over the past 7 years, again, I'll show you why that matters. This is an oil site that I had gone to. It was officially remediated. So the oil company was supposed to have cleaned it up, and it's supposed to be all clean. But as you can see, when it gets stirred, just for about 20 to 30 seconds, a lot of oil filters to the top. And then you can reach in and actually feel the oil that's in the water. So over the past 7 years, they've been documenting this, and in 2013, when we were there initially launching the tech side of this program, the Peruvian government actually, after these 7 years of activism from the local groups, responded to this information, came out and visited the sites themselves, and declared the area a state of environmental emergency, which is really a major victory for these local groups, because up until that point, they'd been totally ignored. Their information, it was their word of mouth, kind of oral tradition, against these manufactured reports by the oil company. And up until that time, like I said, the Peruvian government really hadn't listened to them. So there's a shift that's happening, and we see it all the time, where when traditionally marginalized groups like indigenous populations or like the grassroots women in Haiti, when they're just telling their own stories, often they're not listened to. But when they can back it up with evidence that's more recognized by a more Western audience, when they can give data in a report, when they can show a map that has detailed information, when they can show a photograph that produces evidence, it really changes the game for them and helps them start to become listened to. So we're working across the Amazon on basically a bunch of tools that together provide a toolkit for local groups, again, dealing with situations living in more remote off-grid areas. And there's 3 aspects of this that we really identified as the key challenges along the tech line. So the first is how they're gathering information. The second is how they're managing that information. So often, gathering is relatively simple. There are a lot of tools out there now for gathering information, but usually those programs are set up often by academics or larger NGOs from the United States, Western Europe. And when it comes to actually making sense of the information they gather, local groups are often dependent on outsiders. And then finally, how they're sharing that information. So it's not enough, of course, to gather the information to even make it into something that's a report. If you don't get it in the hands of the right people, if you don't have a smart strategy on what your advocacy targets are, then that information doesn't really matter. So we've got a bunch of different things we're doing, and I'll go a little more in depth on some of them. On the gather side of the equation, we're focusing on participatory mapping and offline mapping. So really making mapping tools that our partners can use in the villages where they live, even if that's 2 days' walk from an internet connection. We're, of course, experimenting with mobile data collection. Smartphones are pretty amazing that on one little device you can now gather the GPS points, you can gather a photo, you can gather video, you can fill in a form. All of that in one device makes a difference, but they also often aren't as robust as a GPS and a camera might be. Smartphones are susceptible to the conditions of the rainforest, so we've been testing out which ones are more rugged for our partners to use. And then we've also been testing drones. A lot of our partners are dealing with issues around illegal logging, so deforestation, or illegal mining, where there's a lot of sediment and harmful chemicals that are being put into their water stream, and even things like palm oil plantations that are getting put in place of pre-existing rainforest. So all of those are things where imagery from drones can be quite helpful. On the managed side of the equation, we're testing how to make it easier for partners to copy information that they gather in the field so that they can have duplicate copies when hard drives and computers inevitably break down, and so that they can more easily send that information to headquarters, maybe to their advocacy partners in a larger city. We've built a tool called Map Filter, I'll show you, that helps take information that they're gathering via mobile data apps and turns it into a really simple to use tool for creating reports that they can share with their local community as well as outsiders. And then we're also testing out ways to incorporate satellite imagery as well for our local partners to make use of satellites in a way that helps inform their local forest governance, for instance. And then on the share side of the equation, we're really looking at some really simple things, like how do you automatically print maps of the information that they're gathering? How do you share things more easily? And then a tool I'll show as well called Journey that combines a narrative with a map to really share their story with the outside world. So going in depth a little bit, on the mapping side, this is a workshop we did in Chiapas, Mexico, with a community that's been under threat of eviction from the Mexican authorities. And so they decided that the first step for them was really to create a map of their territory, both on the human side of the equation as well as then a geographically accurate map that they can use in their advocacy efforts and on their legal case with the Mexican government. So we started off with the participatory mapping process, then training how to use GPS, going around taking points at all the edges of their community. And then here we were, again, 2 days walk from the nearest internet connection, and for the first time ever they were able to produce a map of their territory, and we were able to produce, importantly, a digital map that they then are going to be able to share in their legal case. So this was a tool, this is an existing tool called ID Editor, which was built for OpenStreetMap, which is kind of like the Wikipedia of maps. And in other words, it's a global map that anybody can edit and contribute to. It's a really great tool. And ID Editor makes it really simple to edit those maps. It's a tool that works online. We adapted it to work offline. This is another example of participatory mapping. This was in Achor territory in Peru. And then this is an example of, we're still building this out. This is just a kind of prototype of what we'd like to build eventually, but a whole system basically for indigenous groups to manage their own geographic information, even when they're offline and far from an internet connection, in a very simple to use format. This is the English version, but of course we'll have it in Spanish as well. And there's just a little video that kind of shows the way in which community members will be able to take the base layer map and then place all the information that might be relevant to them, the types of animals, the types of plants, different cultural sites, etc. And then they can fill in stories about it. So the mobile data collection front, we've been experimenting with a lot of existing tools. I don't know how geeky and technical to get since there's kind of a wide range of people here, but we've been using things like the Open Data Kit, which is built on Android. Who's familiar with that? Okay, handful. And Form Hub, which comes off of that, and a lot of different of the open source tools that are out there. And there's a lot of great ones. But we've found consistently some challenges based on how those tools have been designed and for what purposes they've been designed. And primarily the challenges we found, first of all, some user interface stuff that we're working with people who have very, very little technical expertise, very little experience using any sort of technology. So the shallower the learning curve, the better. The easier it is to use, like easy enough that my mom can use. If my mom can use it, then it probably is good for our partners to use. So let's see, and I'll tell you a few more of the challenges we're having. The other challenge we're having is that most of the tools, like Open Data Kit, for instance, or ODK, it's a great tool, but it was built really prioritizing getting information from many people in the field, collecting data, to getting into a centralized server. And if you're, say, an academic, that's really great because you want to make sure you have all of that information and that it all comes to you. But for our partners who might be visiting multiple oil spill sites and who are gathering all this information, they really need to have that information locally on their phones. And right now, a lot of the existing tools, as soon as you sync it, as soon as you get to a place where there's an internet connection, it goes from your phone onto the centralized server, and you don't have that information anymore. That's really disempowering to our partners. And what we found in Guyana, for example, partners were doing multiple day treks to remote areas of their community to take information about gold mining operations that were happening. They would come back to their community, and before they would actually link up to the internet connection, they would hand copy the information from their phone onto a notebook so they could give a report back to the village chief and not just have it go to the database. Well, obviously that's problematic. That's kind of against the whole point of using technology. You're supposed to make it easier, not having to do more work in terms of writing it down. So we've been looking at what are some of the ways that we can address that. And we're trying an experiment, and it's happening in a couple days. On Friday, I'm flying to Peru. My colleague Gregor is already there. And we're hosting a hackathon in the rainforest. This is just a screenshot from our website. I encourage you all to check it out. It's hacktherainforest.org, and we're going to be blogging about it over the next few weeks. But we're bringing together folks from our partner organizations, so about 15 different indigenous people from Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia are going to be there, as well as 42 participants overall from 9 different countries who are representing civil society organizations, advocates from elsewhere in Peru who are doing work on like the legal side and the human rights side, our partner Hivos Foundation that's helping to sponsor the event, and then a lot of amazing software developers and coders who are donating their time and volunteering to come down and work with our partners to help address their challenges and to build out new mobile data collection app that will help them better do their work in the field. So the main things that we're going to be addressing in the upcoming hackathon are the user experience, just trying to really make it easier to use for our partners. Peer-to-peer sync, so that if I go out to one oil spill, when I come back and sync that information, all that information goes to my partner's phone as well, so that when they're in the area, they can record, they can see over time how an oil spill is changing. We're also looking at offline media workflows. They gather quite a bit of information that can't all be shared over a traditional internet connection, so looking at other ways to share information. And then finally, really trying to make the tools map-based. So we have no intention of starting this all from scratch. We're going to be building off of a lot of existing open-source libraries, but we're excited to be bringing together a lot of really smart minds with many different areas of expertise to address the challenge. Okay, drones. So as I said, a lot of our partners are dealing with issues where aerial imagery could be quite helpful, could even be a game changer in trying to address some of the policy changes that they need to see. So we've been experimenting with drones in 2 places. And the first one I'm going to tell you about is Guyana. This is actually a picture of one of our partners in Guyana, and she is soldering. My colleague's British and he always says soldering. She's soldering the flight simulator onto a drone that her partners, her community has built themselves. And this is them testing it out. And I'm actually going to show this short video of the building of the drone.
Ready to start. This is South Central. And this is a village called Shulina, mixed village, Wapishana and Makushi speaking language. And this is the beautiful Kanako Mountains where it is situated in. And this is the map where we've been working for the past 6 to 7 days now. We've been working hard on our drones. As you can see inside our workshop. This is our beautiful canal with all the equipment in here. And this is the first drone, this is the first handicraft that we Wapichana monitors built. And this is the workshop, this is all what you see here are equipment. So these are the guys we work with. Here's Samson, from Timothy Isaacs, Crowder, Philip Brown, Ashalton, Ron James, Ashalton. I'm going to show you how we made it.
Trying to help and Jacobi to trying to iron this piece of plastic in wood or the food.
I'm opening a hole. Widening a hole. The part doesn't fit. So just making a part, kind of.
We're trying to make two cables in one. So we now the tie is we're doing the bowstring tie. The tie bowstring like that, so then we're doing it.
I'm trying to scroll, setting up the tail over truly. We're trying to build a plane and shutting up, insulating up, yeah.
Just connecting two wires, soldering some stuff. And my first soldering experience hasn't been going quite well. Looking at the elephant. We done got one edge first. Yeah, with this maiden flight, we hope flies good. And if not, our engineering may not be really good. But HL has our tools and our we'll compensate with our bad engineer with good flight. Good. It was made in Suriname after 2.5 days. About there's about. We assembled it, we pasted it, we cut it and patched it up. And yeah, that's about it.
It's made in Suriname.
Made in Suriname, yeah. Hopefully it can go
This is our motto. We just have the servos. And this is the receiver. Speed control. Battery. Push rod. We should call this lock. No name. And that is our remote control.
Jaco, this is
Jaco it is?
Jaco.
What is Jaco?
It's a hawk.
Hawk. Perfect.
Yeah. You want a boat?
I think you could almost just let go.
And we have tested it and we gave the name for it in Wapishana, a hawk name Jacobi, the yellow-headed caracara. So it flew well. We had a nice test and everybody was such shocked to see the first time we had Wapishana monitors build a drone. And this is the second drone that we are now going to test for the next few hours time. We're just waiting on the breeze to calm down. And we gave it a name, Quadat.
I'm going over to a lollipop stick to my drill. So we use plastic, cut it and we bore it, and we pasted it, and it was made by Timothy. Yeah, we are now installing another component called the antenna on the wing. Now I'm boring a hole here to create this tool. We went yesterday and try out again what we can fly.
Let's go. Halfway to the start of the day.
I'm going to stop it just there. That drone works quite well, and they're able to get to fly. The first drone was actually built for crashing purposes, for testing and crashing. It was a test drone, and the second one is the real one that we built, that they built in order to do long distance surveys over their land where there's gold mining going on and illegal logging, so they can do. They can send, hopefully. Down the line, we'll be able to get it to go 40 to 50 kilometer long missions to be able to get footage. But in the meantime, we were able, while we were there, to gather through, this is stitching together 500 images that the drone took over their village to stitch together a 3D rendering of their village, which is quite exciting for the group. And part of the reason I wanted to show the video was to give you a sense of where we're working, the kind of conditions, and what it's like for communities. And the real strategic decision that we made when in investigating what would be the best way to get aerial imagery of their territory, deciding to have them build their own drone rather than get an expensive agricultural model, for instance. There are many drones out there that are prefabricated, but the challenge is, especially, again, working in these remote environments, that the moment that one goes down and breaks, it's basically a ruined piece of very expensive equipment. And all that changes when they're able to build it themselves. They can repair it. They can, all the parts, the component parts of that piece are relatively inexpensive. And so we brought down duplicates of everything so that the drone that they built, again, they can repair along the way, which is part of our philosophy around the sustainability of the programs we're doing. This is in Ecuador, where we just experimented with the DJI Phantom, which is a well-known quadricopter that's on the market. I see them all the time in San Francisco. There's a lot of people kind of being nuisances, maybe flying them over people's backyards and stuff. But in Ecuador, it can serve a really important purpose. And here's an example. This is a visualization. On the right-hand side is aerial imagery from about 10 years ago. On the left-hand side is the stitched-together imagery that we took with the quadricopter, and this is of deforestation due to a land invasion that the Sequoia people are experiencing. So you can see a really incredible level of detail. You can see some of the individual trees that have remained, but all of the trees that are gone as a result of this land invasion. This is something that the local community, the Sequoia, have been complaining about to the Ecuadorian government. But again, just based on word of mouth, the Ecuadorian government has taken absolutely no action to try to address the deforestation and the land invasion that's going on. Here's the printout version of the imagery that they took with the quadricopter, and that they're going to be submitting to the Ecuadorian government to try to get them to take action on the land invasion. So, drones can be used for all sorts of purposes, but we're excited by applying them to a situation that's really pressing for the needs of our partners and, of course, by extension, all of us, because we all depend upon the rainforest. So briefly, here's a tool, Map Filter, that we built that, as I was mentioning, people were taking information and actually hand copying it into their notebooks. We built this as a really simple, easy-to-use tool for them to create their own reports of what's going on. And I'm going to stop here to allow for questions. I think I went over a couple minutes, and just see what you all would like to talk about, what you'd like to hear about from our work.
Thank you, Emily. Questions?
Hi. Can you talk a bit about how you build trust in local communities?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a good question and major. We only work in places where we're invited to work, first of all. So we don't come in and try to forge trust with the community that is wondering why we're even there. Second is we only work partly because we only work in places where we're invited, we only also work in places where we have some sort of expertise or local connection, language ability, knowledge of the situation, whatever it might be. Part of how we found we do that is by having the right team members. I think our staff are usually incredible people who can bridge both the technical world and talk to coders and often do some coding themselves, and kind of almost like an anthropologist's ability to really connect with local communities and understand the cultural situation. And trust building takes time, so part of it is being willing to be there. Part of it's that we never come in with our own agenda on things. We obviously, our expertise is in technology, but we don't presume that technology is even going to be helpful in a particular situation. So we really come in with an open mind around what are the challenges, and we try to understand what those are and then build from there. I could go on and on about it, but I think it's really about, for us, again, a core philosophy is that we might have expertise in technology. We certainly have more privilege and more access to the outside world than our partners do, but we don't see ourselves as higher than them or better than them. Always, this is the best thing about my work, is that we work with people who are incredible experts on issues they're working on. They're incredible leaders, and we see it as a privilege to work with them. And so I think that attitude is a lot of what helps us build trust with them, is that people can sense that. Everybody who's ever been a student knows what it's like to be talked down to versus treated like a human with your own sense of agency and knowledge. So I think that, and by that I don't mean that all students are put in that position. I just mean everybody knows what it's like to be talked down to versus to be engaged in an authentic way. So that's, I guess, a short version of the answer. Yeah.
How do you get in contact? How do you get in contact with people in the first place to get invited?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that we get in contact with people in the first place has been largely with how we've grown our network. So we started off doing work in Southeast Asia because I was already doing work there. We already had connections. We're doing work in the Amazon because our program director had worked there for a long time. We've been invited to places like the images I showed from Chiapas, Mexico. We were invited by a locally based but international filmmaker and anthropologist who had worked there for a long time and had that relationship, and the community had asked him, help us find somebody to help us do the mapping. So mostly it's through personal connections and word of mouth. Over time, I think as we expand our toolkit and trying to make that available to more people, we again see that as scaling through trusted networks.
So we'll go here and then Brady.
Marginalized communities often speak marginalized languages, and their languages are not only marginalized but denigrated. I'm wondering, in your encounters with those communities, have you found that they basically accept as natural and inevitable the low status of their languages, or have they aspired to using technology to enhance the statuses of their languages and allow them to use them internally and also in their interactions with the wider world?
That's a great question, too. It's something that I'm really passionate about, which is languages as ways of knowing and the value of that. And I think a lot of our work is, if not directly, hoping to protect those things. So I think that in terms of our partners, some are much more, have lost sense of their traditional cultures more than others. So pretty much everybody in Latin America, for instance, everybody might speak Spanish. They may not be as in touch with a lot of their traditions. Others are fiercely proud of their traditions, and Spanish is very much a second language, and they use it strategically because they have to, and they recognize that they have to, but they very much try to protect their native languages. And I absolutely see our work as trying to support efforts to retain the incredible diversity that exists and help protect communities one example that we're doing work in is Achuar territory in northern Peru. And some of the Achuar live in areas where there's already been oil drilling and where they're dealing with contamination and they're dealing with all these problems that come from that. And Achuar in another area have an oil concession on their land, but there hasn't been oil drilling yet because they've been fiercely fighting for the past 15 years to prevent that from going in because they've seen the impact and they don't think it's worth it. The small amount of jobs and money that may come in really decimates everything else. And so they're working to try to prevent that. And the mapping has been for us a way to help them highlight their kind of cultural values. So we've always been passionate about the way that photography and mapping can help transcend those language barriers, and while actually helping them retain their own languages. So it's a much longer topic, but I get most excited by the communities where they're really in touch and trying to preserve their languages and different cultural traditions. And I think, like anything, technology applied inappropriately can just lead to the loss of those things, or it can help protect and preserve those things. And quite a few communities that we're working with, when they learn about what the internet is, they get really excited about creating a digital space to highlight their languages, their traditions, their culture.
Yeah, it seems as though one of the outcomes of your work would be an increase in aspiration and hope among the community. And I was wondering if you've ever encountered a situation where you haven't the community hasn't accomplished what it was hoping, whether the government doesn't act like they were hoping to once they receive the maps. And how do you address those potential failures? Do you tamper the expectations? Do you have some sort of follow through after to see how things are going?
Yeah. So we've taken different projects to different levels of completion, and I think we always try to reduce expectations because you don't want to promise things that you can't deliver. And so often the fights that are worth fighting are the ones that you don't know if you're going to win. The ones that are really important and really pressing and urgent, you don't know for sure if you're going to win, but you have to do it anyway. So in terms of how we try to do that, I think it's similar to the way we build trust. It's that we come in with truly this idea of partnership, and we come in to be of aid as much as we can. We try to be really clear from the outset of doing things small and incrementally. So we'll do. We always stay in touch with our partners, so we absolutely stay in touch over the long haul. But if we're going to do something, we do the small things we can along the way. We generally try to help them get the funding they need to do projects so that we're not, we've kind of, as an organization, don't see our role as helping to raise funds for projects and so on. We really just try to focus on helping to play a supportive role in those processes. So in terms of places where things haven't succeeded, I think a lot of our projects are still in the like right now anyway in Latin America, a lot of projects are in the kind of initial phases of multi-year goals. So we'll see how that pans out over time. And a lot of it has been pure experimentation. And in the early days, we weren't as strategic. We were doing just a lot of capacity building workshops where we weren't trying to tie them as much into longer term goals. And those were fine, but again, we actually didn't feel like we were accomplishing as much. So that's one of the lessons we learned, is that we wanted to actually be more integrated into longer term strategy around really pressing barriers, really pressing obstacles, and that's what we're focusing on right now. Yeah.
Maybe we have time for one more question. I think Brandy.
Thank you for your presentation, Emily. My question deals with open data. So we've seen governments around the world start open data initiatives, and I was wondering what have been the benefits and barriers in your work to the opening of data?
We're really excited down the line of how government work on opening data can come back to local communities, and again, because that's our focus, is like on the really local level and not so much on the national level. But we're really excited over time with how information, say, about resource concessions in the Amazon can help inform local activism. In terms of barriers, I wouldn't say this is a barrier so much as checking the assumptions around open data. So often if we're coming from a kind of more like situations like places like this, in the Bay Area or in New York or in London, we just kind of have this, people with somewhat progressive mindset have this assumption that open data is good, it helps inform decision making, et cetera. But for a local community, whether or not they share their data is actually a very sensitive issue. And there often are a lot of colonial attitudes, I think, still built into how information is extracted. So information becomes a resource, right? And it gets extracted from the local level, taken out to inform policy. And even if that policy is really well intentioned, I think that if local communities aren't really involved in the process of deciding who gets access to the information and why, it can feel really exploitative. So an example is the call center in Haiti produces great information about rates of sexual violence and incidents of sexual violence anyway happening in Haiti. But the reason that it gets reported is not because local people want to report the information so that some expert at the government level can know. It's because they're getting a service in response to it. So I think one of the barriers is around the mindset of people who want more open data and see that as a benefit, which I certainly do, that to think about the design of things in a way that it's not just extracting information from the local communities, but really giving them something in return, giving them a reason to be involved in that process of opening up data, because at a local level, that's where all the information is about what's really happening in communities. So I think the process by which marginalized communities are really integrated and brought in as like equal partners and not just seen as kind of resources to extract. I think for me that's like my soapbox on it anyway. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. Really insightful.
And if I didn't get the chance to answer your question, feel free to get in touch with me. And thank you.